Welcome to Heather Ewing, the CRE Rundown. I have a wonderful guest today. It is none other than Mustafa Ladha. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Heather. Nice to be on the show.
Definitely. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. And we've connected through LinkedIn, and I really enjoyed learning about your background and your transition as an investor years ago. Please share with our audience a little bit more about you.
Sure. I know even before the podcast, when we were talking, we were just discussing how real estate is such a huge space, and people are often looking, at that space thinking, how do I get started? And I think that's also indicative of life. Like when you go through college, you have a certain vision of what you're going to study, and then you go out into the real world and get a job. And in most people's situation, it's nothing like what they studied in college. And so that was similar for me. I studied genetics. I went to medical school. I decided medicine wasn't how I wanted to help people. So I came back. I got a job in the pharmaceutical industry. And in that space, I was helping people in terms of drug safety, which was great. But it was like, how do I kind of scale that impact and help more people? Fundamentally, when people are taking medicine, yeah, they want it to be safe, but they don't really understand what goes on behind the scenes. So I wanted my impact to be more germane or more relevant to the average person. And so a lot of my friends, a lot of the people that I was speaking to, they fundamentally had challenges understanding their money and how to grow money. And I could I could relate to that. So I was on my own journey of financial independence. Along the way, I took time out to really educate people in my circles to say, hey, this is how you invest, this is how you think of money. And that's kind of led me to where I am now, where I help people passively invest in real estate.
Which is terrific because there's so many misnomers on it. There's just a wealth of information that isn't as accurate. So it's nice to have your voice on LinkedIn and on other platforms for that. So you touched on mindset essentially, right? What is the shift that helped you, or what do you notice helps your clients in shifting into a more wealth mindset?
I think it's a great question because I think when you get started, at least for me, or a lot of people that I speak to, I don't think mindset is really valued or respected or prioritized as much as it should be because you can't know what you don't know. So early on, I was working that pharmaceutical job. I live in New Jersey. It's an expensive state to live in. And I'm looking at it like fundamentally, if I just rely on this one job, I'm not going to hit my goals. And my goals weren't
Right,
monetary, they were on based on impact. Like if you want to give charity, for example, you have to be able to make money to pay your bills to help others, right? So
right.
so for me it was very I was looking at things like that and saying fundamentally if I'm not making enough now and if the American dream is XYZ, it used to be like the house with the white picket fence. Now I don't know. And
Right.
traveling now maybe it's
Seems so
traveling
long
the
ago,
world.
doesn't it?
Exactly. Now it's probably traveling the world and working from wherever. Whatever your version of the American dream is, fundamentally it costs money. And then you don't want to hit 65 and not be able to afford retirement, which is the reality for most people. So then it's like if, the traditional wisdom is XYZ and that gets you, ABC outcome and that outcome is suboptimal, then you have to start making changes now. So I think to some degree it was thinking through that her whole workflow, Heather, if that makes sense, and
Right.
talking to my friends to say, hey, fundamentally, or the people in my circles to say, hey, fundamentally, what is your goal? Because real estate is not the answer for everyone. And there's
Hmm.
no answer, there's no universal, ubiquitous answer for everyone because everyone's problems are unique and everyone's challenges are different. So it's to understand where's the person at, what is the right strategy for them. It may be real estate, it may not be. And even within real estate, Heather, obviously you're very accomplished. So like real estate is a big space. But when you're
It
talking
is.
to somebody who's maybe new to the space, it's viewed as like a nice tidy box, but it's not. There's so many
Right.
different asset classes, and you want to peel back the layers to say, hey, fundamentally, I do multifamily real estate. So I provide housing. That might not be the right solution for XYZ investor, right? So it's kind of about understanding the person's concerns, really hearing where they're at, and treating it as
Hmm.
we're on a journey together. There's like no pressure in this process. And fundamentally, if I'm not the best person to help you, I'm going to tell you early on because that doesn't help anyone long term. And I
Right.
that relationship long term over like, 20, 40 years. How do I optimize value for somebody? It's by giving them exactly what they're asking for, not exactly what I want to give them. And there are two differences.
I agree completely. And one of the things I've really liked about connecting with you through LinkedIn for the past, I don't know, is it maybe almost a year, somewhere in that arena of your heart and knowledge really shine through in your posts. And so to me, especially when someone is getting to know maybe real estate in general, the different asset classes and how investments work, what is passive truly, what is it not? I think it's really nice how you genuinely care and really take the time of getting to know people. Because to your point, if you don't really know what someone's goals are, what their past is with investing or lack thereof, and their risk tolerances, all of these are really crucial factors, and you can't guide them effectively without that. So I love how you really do take that step back and look at it from an impact standpoint of how can you create the best impact in this person's life and thus their wealth.
And I think just to add to that, Heather, like it can be a not fun process for people in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that like real estate is confusing. They recognize
Right.
it's confusing and they're not taking action. Then they talk to somebody like me who more or less is like, here's the forest. We're gonna walk through the forest together. And along the way, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna talk about this bird. I'm gonna talk about this plant. And these are like useless things for you. But in 3 years' time, it'll all click. And you'll be like, okay, this is why Mustafa was talking about tax efficiency and saying I'm not ready for this. But I'm happy,
Right.
Mustafa's happy to talk about it, and he'll spend 5, 10 minutes talking about the strategy that's not right for me right now. And it's not right for that investor right now because that strategy is like, you know, maybe you'll get your money back in 3 years through a refinance event, but fundamentally you're holding for 10 years. And that investor is right now focused on short-term cash flow. So they're in a completely
Mm-hmm.
different bucket versus like building generational wealth. But for me, Heather, it's
Right.
important because it really stems from that mentality of you don't know what you don't know. So if no one is taking that time to kind of educate you on the things that you should be thinking about in the future, then you can't decide for yourself if I want to think about it now or if I want to actually think about it in the future. Does that all make sense or not really?
Like, I think a lot of it, it's funny, one of my early mentors made that statement of you don't know what you don't know. And I remember at the time I had heard it and I was like, that is a valuable statement because you don't know what to ask, you don't know what to look for or what to seek out. And so to your point, that's really important. And I think it's all partnering up. And to your point, I relate everything to marathons. It's like you can't run before you walk, and you can't run the marathon until you get some miles under your belt. And having those pivotal markers at each point. So similarly to investing, you have to do it in different stages, and everyone has different learning curves with it, risk tolerances where some might move really fast and just go and others aren't there. So I think it's important of almost, if you want to say, understanding the whole person, because money is a huge part of life. And I think too, when people feel that they aren't where they're at, it's really uncomfortable to talk about that. And that's where I like too, I would anticipate your approach is really just a completely respectful understanding and helping them see of like, hey, this is a courageous step. And now you can move into these next steps. And here's our plan and adjust as needed.
And I think the beautiful emotional aspect of this, Heather, that you're touching on is that people unfortunately attribute their financial status to their
Hmm.
personal value, which
Right.
is illogical, respectfully to everyone,
Hmm.
because where you're at
Right.
financially does not represent who you are as a person. There are different struggles and adversities that you're overcoming that affect you financially, but your like mental resilience, how you show up and how you respond to that is who you are as a person. They're two different things. So whether somebody has $1 or 100 million, one person is not better than the other, in my humble opinion. Um,
Right.
but like we live in America, America is very capitalistic, so we tend to judge things by numbers, which is not
Right.
necessarily bad, but it's to say fundamentally money is a tool. I would not go around saying, "Oh, hey, I have the nicest calculator or the nicest pen." I would
Right.
say I have the nicest house or I have the nicest car. So it's like, hey, fundamentally, if you have a nicer car, nicer house, nicer pen, nicer calculator, you're not necessarily a nicer person, right? So if that's the mentality and you try to have that mental shift as an individual or when you're talking to individuals, then it's a very no judgment space. And what I've learned over the years is like everyone feels like their background or people like them are bad with money or don't like to talk about money or have like money sensitivity. And we all have it in different forms. So I think
Right.
to some degree, having that conversation is important because then you're able to say, hey, fundamentally, you are the right profile of person to invest in a 10-year strategy, for example, which is like tax efficiency, generational wealth, all of these buzzwords that you'll see around, like negative K1s, tax-free income,
Right.
all these like keywords. But if that investor has never invested in real estate, it's okay to admit to yourself or for them that you're scared, you have anxiety, you're unsure. These
Mhm.
are not negative emotions. It just means that the
Right.
proof of concept isn't there. No one should do anything unless they're convinced it'll work out well. Because if you're doing something with low conviction, it's probably not going to work out well, even if it's
No,
100% passive, right?
exactly.
Still room, like, you'll delay sending the wire for like 6 months and you'll miss out on the opportunity, right? It's like
Right.
one of those things that if you don't have buy-in on the approach and the strategy, nothing's going to happen positive. Like if I go to the dentist
No.
and he's saying I need to floss, and I don't floss the next year, I'm checking the hygienist to see is she saying my teeth are worse? If she's saying they're not worse,
Hmm.
floss. And it's the same with investing. Fundamentally, you need to see your portfolio growing to have more buy-in in that strategy. And that's kind of what I've noticed. That's why, there are strategies optimized for short-term return. And I tell people straight up, like fundamentally, this strategy will make you good money, but you're going to get taxed a lot at your ordinary
Hmm.
income. It's not the best for growing your net worth, but you're saying XYZ. So psychologically, you need this to kind of boost yourself up to feel comfortable investing in something outside the stock market. And none of that is
Right.
negative, even though it might be phrased as you need a psychological boost or you need to feel good about yourself. Those are not negative things that I would be saying. It's just to say fundamentally, there's a roadblock, and this is the detour.
Right.
Anytime you see a detour sign, you're not happy, but you recognize that you need to go on that detour to get to your destination. And that's kind of what we're doing, if that all makes sense, Heather.
Definitely. And I think a lot of it too is people want to know that if they have this input, that they'll get this output. And there's always room for shifts in the market and changes and unforeseen things. You can do a great job of due diligence, and sometimes there's just things that are there that you hadn't anticipated. So, with that conversation, too, of if someone isn't fully honest with you about their feelings, about their concerns, their desires, all these things, you can't accurately guide them. That's like, back in the day of having a map like you're in Iowa, but you're in Idaho. It's not going to serve you well, right?
Yeah, very, very true.
So it's really, yeah, it's getting real, being authentic.
No, I 100% agree. And the at least from my perspective, the beautiful thing is there's never any pressure. Like if somebody's looking to invest or they're not looking to invest, fundamentally, my question is not are you looking to invest? It's are you looking to learn? Somebody's not looking to
Mhm.
learn, there's nothing I can do, and that's perfectly fine.
Right.
Fundamentally, if it's a conversation based on, hey, this is what's out there, then it's a very exciting conversation for everybody because you're showing up
Mhm.
saying, hey, I'm learning something I don't know. And the person I'm learning from can be 100% wrong. And this is important, and you touched on due diligence. The person that I'm talking to can be 100% wrong, but they're sharing their perspective based on their experiences. So I can learn from that, and it can revalidate my other strategies. I could be investing in, Airbnbs in like California. And this guy can be doing ground up construction in multifamily in New Jersey. Completely
Right.
different sector. But California
Mhm.
and New Jersey are both strong real estate markets. So if he's feeling pain in New Jersey, then I can say, okay, hey, I might start to feel pain in California, or vice versa. Or if his build cost is much less than mine in California, it's interesting to reflect on because maybe there's somebody in California that has his build cost, right? So my point is to say that no matter where somebody's at, if you have the right mindset, which is kind of something you alluded to early on, you can treat every
Mhm.
conversation as I can learn one thing. That one thing can make me 1% better, and that 1% better can help me accomplish XYZ goals.
And that's why I'm really happy in general when you hear there's a lot of emphasis on a growth mindset, which is what you're sharing here, versus the fixed mindset of this is how, this is the roots that I'm from, this is how the family is, and that kind of like kiss your life goodbye.
Yeah.
There's no option. But I really like the mindset that you take to that. So the world of investing. is obviously busy. There could be a lot of stress. There's a lot of variables. How do you find your ways to de-stress?
So I think early on it was like, when I was in college, it was like this was one of the questions they asked, and I was like, oh, I just go to sleep. Then later on you realize that, oh, you just like eat. And there's nothing wrong with that, in moderation. But I think as
Right,
I've gone through life, you find other outlets that are, I guess, more traditionally healthy. Like you find sports. I play pickleball pretty regularly. I go to the
nice.
gym. But I think the number one thing is like when I've had a tough day and I come home and I have two young daughters. So when my older daughter
Mhm.
comes and she runs and she gives me a hug, there's nothing better in my opinion. So,
Yeah,
so I tell all the guys who are like having kids, who are having, daughters, I say like, listen, I don't have any sons, so I don't know, but there's nothing like
right,
daughters love in terms of like making your day amazing, no matter how stressful it's been. So I think Heather, for me, like to answer the question pretty simply, I'm pretty traditional in these things. Like, like
right.
family time is really important. And to me, like that's the best thing when it comes to like drowning out whatever stress there is in life, because to some degree, circling back to that growth mindset, if you're not stressed, if you're not uncomfortable, you're probably not growing,
Mhm.
with all
Right,
respect. Like there are days where or weeks or whatever where I'm looking at like life is too easy or my work is too like mundane. That means I'm not like pushing the envelope. I'm not growing in different directions. Because I think for me, part of the mentality to maintain a growth mindset has been
mhm.
being comfortable being uncomfortable, in the sense that I
Exactly.
always need to be pushing myself and I always need
Hmm.
to be like, oh man, like, this is like I'm testing the boundaries, I'm learning something new, I'm trying something out. And there comes a point where you start feeling comfortable in that flux, in that change. And I think
Hmm.
that's important to like maintaining a growth mindset and to just being curious about what else is out there that I don't know.
Right. Well, and I think too that that ties into human performance, right? Of we all are wired, I think, with different gifts, and it's a matter of utilizing those gifts, sharing them with people, kind of like investing of what a wealth of knowledge, of information. You can truly transform people's lives with this. And also it just really makes life beautiful, and it allows you to know kind of like where's your boundaries and then how do you go beyond that, kind of what you're saying, and really max life out. And I agree with you completely. It's if you're too comfortable, there's an old saying another mentor taught me of, you're either growing or dying. And that ties in with this of, I think it's good to have a little comfort after you pushed hard, right? But then too, it's like it's the natural adventure of like, how do I expand? How do I perform at a higher level so I can impact more, which is something that I know is really important to you. So as we bring this home, and you've kind of answered part of this, but what would you say living fully means to you?
It's a good question. I don't know. I think to some degree, living fully just means maximizing the time that we have on Earth. I think for a
Mhm.
lot of people, that definition is different. But for me, it's one of those things that I'm of the mindset that like the next minute's not guaranteed. So if that's the
Right,
case, then you want to really do what you want to do. And then you need to define that. So for me, like what I want to do is I want to be in a position to help people. So if that means that I'm
right,
talking about like money and I'm educating people about money, that's a form of charity where you're teaching people about a topic that they don't
definitely.
admit that they want to learn about necessarily because it feels uncomfortable. So it's like, okay, we have to navigate this uncomfortable feeling, no problem. And then we have to get to this raw data and in theory, we have to make it entertaining as well or interesting or capture people's attention. Because if we just talk about spreadsheets, which I prefer, um, and maybe the average person I talk to prefers, it might not resonate with everyone. So you have to say, okay, this is
Mhm.
fundamentally what it means. Here's a picture of the asset. Here's, what it can mean for your net worth and for like the life that you're trying to build. And then fundamentally that puts you in a position where you're able to help people who are not able to invest by,
Right.
giving back in charity and things like that. So for me, Heather, it's really those are the types of things that make me feel fulfilled. But then also it's
Mhm.
about kind of realizing that growth is in multiple directions. So like in that example where I talked about stress and my kids, it's also to say, hey, fundamentally, I don't want to be just hanging out with my kids when I'm stressed. And they're not just a means to
Right.
make me unstressed. I need to also have quality time with them. and I need to kind of learn that like work-life balance, which I think is something like maybe 2, 3 years ago I would not have believed in at all. But part of that growth mindset is kind of keeping your eyes open and saying, hey, where do I need to consistently improve? And so that's something that like last year I worked on a lot, this year I work on. So it's something that as an individual I try to improve on as well, to just figure out what that right level of balance is. And it's different for everyone.
Right.
For some people it can be 90-10, others it can be, 50-50. Whatever that looks like is just to say fundamentally to answer your question, like how are you taking each minute that you have and really feeling like you've maximized it? And for me, it's to
Mhm.
like look at all the different aspects of my life and knowing I'm doing the best I can in each aspect, whether that's like my family life, my work life, my spiritual life, etc.
Wonderful. Well, it was such a pleasure connecting with you, Mustafa. Thank you for joining me today. And share with our audience, how can people connect with you?
Sure. No, Heather, the conversation has been great. People can reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Mustafa Ladha. They can reach out to me via email. It's ml@velocecapital.com. Feel free to contact me either way, and I'd be happy to help add value.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem. Have a good one.
You too.